Gentlemen, thank you. My name is Bernard Zawanda. I am the Director of Infrastructure and Logistics for COMESA, based in Lusaka, Zambia. My task is very simple this afternoon. I'm supposed to introduce my boss, the COMESA Assistant Secretary General Programs, Dr. Ambassador Mohamed Kadah, to give us some remarks before we deep dive into the proceedings of the day. Your Excellency.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
you. Good afternoon. I hope we're not too heavy after having lunch. And I thank the Director very much for the very kind introduction. Well, this is meant to dive deep into the project preparation facility that we have just launched before lunch. And this is an important milestone, of course. Happy to see you joining, and I will just make some very quick highlights of what exactly we expect from the project preparation facility, and then we'll invite the project preparation facility manager to make a presentation about the facility, to be followed afterwards by a discussion, questions and answers, so that we can have some constructive and fruitful exchange on the PPF. It is my pleasure, of course, to join you following the formal launch of the PPF. Today we officially launched as you could see before the lunch break, the COMESA Distributed Renewable Energy and Clean Cooking Project Preparation Facility. But beyond the formalities and the ceremonial aspects of this, what do we really mean by the project preparation facility? It is for us in COMESA a shared commitment to turning ideas into investment-ready projects. Throughout the day, we've had also, of course, several panels. We've heard a lot of ideas from experts and observers and entrepreneurs about energy access in the continent at large, highlighting that the scale of energy access is facing, the challenge that is facing scalable solutions to bridge the gap of energy access, the urgency of clean cooking solutions, and the growing appetite of investors to make good use of opportunities that are available out there. Yet one message has been consistent, not only in this forum, but in general, in all kinds of forums related to energy access. The availability of capital is not so much the constraint. It is rather the ability or the capacity to develop bankable projects. So this is where exactly we want to focus the discussions here, and the exchange we'll hopefully have after these remarks and after the presentation on the PPF. Because it means that if we solve the challenge of project preparation through this PPF, we can unlock significant capital flows and make a qualitative and quantitative leap in terms of energy access in our region. This is what the facility exactly is designed to deliver. But as we reflect this afternoon, I would like to emphasize one point. Project preparation is not just a technical process, as we all know. It is a process of building confidence. Confidence of investors. On the side of investors, I mean that projects are feasible and viable. Confidence on the side of governments, our governments, that those solutions being presented for finance are sustainable, and confidence of our communities that change is indeed coming in terms of energy access. And this confidence-building exercise is very demanding. The conversation we have had in the morning before the lunch and those we will continue to have this afternoon are essential from this aspect. They are where partnerships can be formed, where ideas can be refined, and opportunities begin to take traction in terms of implementation. I encourage you all to make good use of this moment, not only to reflect, but also to exchange and connect. Because the success of this initiative will depend not only on the facility itself, but also on the strengths of the ecosystem around it. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, today I have the privilege of introducing to you Cygnum Capital, our project preparation facility manager, who I must mention was recruited after a very competitive process. We expect Cygnum to help us accelerate the work on providing access to electricity and clean cooking solutions for the marginalized and facilitating preparation of bankable projects through the provision of technical assistance to those in need of assistance. On behalf of COMESA, I want to once again take this opportunity to thank the World Bank, who has made it possible for us to be here today and to provide this facility of support through its generous financial and technical support. I also want to thank my team in COMESA Secretariat, colleagues, director, and project team, and thank everyone who has made it to this lounge today to get to know more about the project preparation facility. I wish you fruitful discussions as Cygnum Capital takes us through a detailed presentation on the facility, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Kandie from Cygnum Capital, leading the team that's going to run and manage this particular facility. And what we're going to do today is take you through a very brief presentation. Then thereafter, there'll be a panel discussion where we'll have a broader view on project preparation. And then we will have a Q&A, which will, where we'll allow you to come to us, ask us questions about the facility. So maybe just to set the scene, we all know the challenges that we face in Africa in terms of access, where we are, the numbers are staggering in terms of what needs to be done. If you look at the numbers, especially on the lack of electricity, the people who lack clean cooking solutions, the task ahead is fairly daunting and demanding. And then when you take a step back and look at what the private sector can do, especially when it comes to this particular subsector, one, financing is a key challenge. It remains a central bottleneck. And then over and above that, there is a very clear issue when it comes to investment readiness. So there are lots of companies that are coming up, trying to get a foothold, become relevant in the market and solve this particular challenge, but investment readiness is something which we see as a key issue. So as a matter of principle, project preparation is really critical, from accelerating access to finance, equipping companies with the tools, intelligence, the knowledge that they need to go out to the market and actually make a difference, and also enhancing business performance. Over and above that, there's definitely a means through which project finance plays a role when it comes to developing a pipeline of investable opportunities. So just to take a step back and before really going deeper into what we will do as Cygnum as the managers of this particular PPF, it has to be viewed, of course, in the context of the wider regional energy access acceleration platform, ASCENT project. through which, of course, COMESA is a key implementing partner, and not to be just seen as a PPF standing on its own, but to be seen in the context of the other key pillars that are there. So one of them, of course, there is an element of knowledge exchange. There's also working with governments when it comes to providing advisory support. And then there's project management. And of course, and this is something that has been discussed widely even in the panels in the morning, around the aspect of digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, as this is really core across the board. So when we zero into what we will do as Cygnum, our objective is very clear. This PPF is meant to provide support to governments, to the private sector, and the bankability is a clear focus in everything that we do, and ensuring that, of course, whatever we develop is ready for investment, so that you could, of course, crowd in the private sector. Again, the approach we take is demand-driven, which basically means as much as we have a number of focus areas, which I'll discuss at the bottom, we will go where the demand is and really align what the PPF can do to ensure that it's reactive to what is there in the market. So some of the things we'll look at, and we'll go deeper into this as we proceed, is one, the PPF will look to provide project development support for national agencies, and we'll discuss how that will work. Again, this being COMESA and it being a regional body, cross-border solutions are key in terms of the focus that we will have. And then, of course, last but of course not least, is supporting the private DRE sector and clean cooking companies. And of course, here the focus is on growth and bankability. The PPF is sitting on $25 million worth of resources that will be spread across these three sort of avenues. And as I mentioned, this will be fairly demand-driven. To go a bit deeper in terms of the overview of this particular project preparation facility, one, is going to operate over a 5-year period. We have identified a set of priority countries, which you can see up there: Burundi, Comoros, the DRC, Ethiopia, Kenya, Lesotho, Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, Rwanda, Sao Tome, Somalia, South Sudan, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zambia. The focus areas, as you can imagine, is the DRE sector. So here we're looking at off-grid, mini-grids, and productive use of renewable energy. We also are looking at clean cooking solutions. And then when it comes to cross-border electrification and energy access in border areas, that's one of the key areas we look at. And then, of course, public sector energy access project development, as well as market development and investment readiness for DRE and clean cooking. When you look at the set of applicants that we'll be looking at, one, we're starting off with the public sector institutions. So we've mentioned energy ministries, rural electrification agencies, public utilities, basically the public sector component that deals with renewable energy. Over and above that, there's the private sector companies, the DRE, in DRE and in clean cooking. And then, of course, there is industry associations and investors. We view working with industry associations as really important for us, because there's an element of them, of course, being in the market, dealing with a much broader set of players, from the early stage to later stage companies, that working with them and having partnerships with them provides access that we as a team can only, of course, dream of, and we'll really try to leverage that as much as we can. So how will the support flow to the various beneficiaries? One, there is something we call publicly available resources, which you could look at as ecosystem interventions. So here we're looking at supporting work that goes towards the development of DRE and clean cooking. And here, if you think about it, example could be something like geospatial planning, deeper research on countries, doing market assessments, and this is information that would go to, of course, enrich the knowledge base that is there of the sectors we are looking at. When it comes to another way of looking at this, we'll develop a roster of experts. Here is what we call the on-demand TA, and here basically we'll work as we begin to deploy this particular facility, to come up with a roster of experts that is there, ready and available to provide support, technical assistance. The other thing which we'll look at, of course, is providing grants for project preparation and business development support. This, of course, will be mostly be milestone-based, and we'll look at private sector DRE and clean cooking companies. The other thing which we also mentioned, and touched a bit on that in the previous slide, is the grants which we'll be able to provide to industry associations. And here it's really unlock access to a broader set of players within the clean cooking DRE subsector. And then last, but of course not least, we are going to have a focus on how we work with national agencies and how we can provide them with technical assistance through the roster of experts in the various areas where they will need interventions. So when it comes to, we thought it also makes sense to sort of highlight the pathways through which you could access and really looking at it from the perspective of from a potential beneficiary. How can you look at and access support? So one, when it comes to knowledge resources, here we'll have a fairly open approach towards it, where we allow working with partners and co-creating avenues through which we could develop natural knowledge resources. Sorry. And then when it comes to companies, we'll have a number of approaches. Here we'll have periodic time-bound calls for proposals, but we'll also couple it with a continuous window through which you could potentially apply. And the areas and how we plan to provide support, of course, is through TA grants or a combination depending on the actual need. When it comes to national agencies, we want to approach it from a TA perspective, and we want to work together with the national agencies to develop the work that they need to be done, and then work to produce that particular output. And when with financiers, we would work on a grant basis, and here we'll have a continuous application window. And when it comes to the roster of experts, we plan to issue out an expression of interest in this particular quarter, and here is to really get a set of experts who we will be able to tap into whenever we need to develop any TA-related output. And to sort of finalize our presentation, the way this particular facility will work, will have an interface with COMESA as who provides oversight of us as a PPF manager. But on a day-to-day basis, what we will have is a selection committee who the PPF manager will work together with. The PIU, of course, will nominate members into the selection committee, and whenever we run a call, there is a sort of application that's done. It is taken through the selection committee, and then thereafter, on approval, it would, depending on which of the applicants have made the approval or have made the application, the disbursements will happen as decided. And of course, as I mentioned, the focus for us is really TA and grants. So to sort of end this particular presentation, you definitely can reach us through this email address. Of course, we'll be here after the session. You can reach out to any of us, and our team is very well represented here. And we'll have a proper, sort of question and answer session after the panel discussion. So without much ado, I'd like to invite my colleague, Will Pearson, who will come and run the panel session. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in Nairobi. As Chris mentioned, I'm his colleague at Cygnum Capital. I'm based in South Africa, so it's a pleasure to come up to East Africa today for this launch. We are very excited to get started, and thank you for the opening remarks. It's much appreciated, and it was a tremendous launch this morning. So very happy to be here with colleagues from COMESA as well. Again, by way of brief introduction, Will Pearson. I have over 20 years experience in the power sector, working across much of sub-Saharan Africa as well as Europe and the US. As my colleague Chris alluded to earlier, and the ambassador as well, this PPF is designed to support governments and private sector stakeholders in developing bankable investment-ready DRE projects. DRE and Clean Cooking projects. In implementing the PPF, we are prioritizing partnerships. I think that's something we want to make very clear. I think something that you will have heard a lot of already at the event so far. There are other organizations providing technical assistance, providing great support to companies, providing investment funds for companies. We are prioritizing how we can best partner with them and be additional through the implementation of this PPF. The topic of today's panel is going to be investment readiness and bankability in the DRE and clean cooking sectors, and just some high-level statistics. There's an estimated investment requirement of at least $1.5 billion annually to achieve universal electrification, and $4 billion annually for universal access to clean cooking. Current investment levels, at least as of 2024, where GOGLA reported that off-grid investment fell 30% in 2024 to a total of $300 million, and the IEA estimated that clean cooking investment in Africa was between 700 to 800 million in 2024, so far below, as many of us know in the audience here. Earlier stage firms have suffered the most from the dip in off-grid investment in recent years, as investment flows in the DRE sectors are increasingly concentrated among a smaller number of companies and markets. Risks slowing investment to companies in these segments include relatively low profit margins, in many cases, exposure to macroeconomic and foreign exchange volatility, smaller investment ticket sizes, data management, and challenging business models. Despite some of the headwinds that we've seen in recent years, there are numerous reasons for optimism in these segments. Some of them include major new initiatives, including Mission 300 and Ascent, evolving business models with improved risk management, techniques that focus more on credit risk as opposed on a narrower focus on sales growth, introduction of innovative blended finance models and more patient investment approaches, and maturation of additional revenue streams such as through carbon markets that could signal a leap in funding in the clean cooking segment in particular. During this panel, we're going to provide a glimpse into some of the trends influencing investment flows into DRE and clean cooking, evaluating the challenges and risks in this sector, and recent trends and tools aimed at mitigating risk in what are inherently challenging segments. Joining me today are going to be representatives from industry associations, investors, and companies active in both DRE and clean cooking. I would like to call the members of the panel to the stage, and if I could ask one of the organizers to also potentially remove the podium, or my colleague, that would be great. Cheers. So thanks again. I'll introduce briefly each panelist in turn, and then give them some time to make their opening remarks. So I'll start with Laura Fortes. from GOGLA. Laura is Associate Director of Access to Finance at GOGLA, where she leads work to unlock finance for the off-grid solar sector and strengthen engagement between companies, investors, donors, and public sector partners. Before joining GOGLA, Laura spent more than 10 years working across investment attraction, campaigns, advocacy, and international engagement in markets including Nigeria, Panama, Mexico, and the Philippines. Across these roles, she worked with governments, private sector actors, and international partners to help connect investment, policy, and economic development. Laura, over to you.
Thanks. Hello. Hi, everybody. Cool. Maybe thanks for that introduction, Will, and a few words about what GOGLA does. So GOGLA is the Association of the Off-Grid Solar Energy Industry. So we have members from companies, investors, consultancies, etc., that do cover technologies from solar lanterns up to systems for the weak grid, solar generators, for example. As an association, we convene the industry. We have an event in October, end of October, in Kigali, if you're interested. We influence policy and finance, and we inform standards. We do capacity building for companies, and we do knowledge and insights as well. So maybe sneak peek, you referenced our 2024 data, and the sneak peek into the data of last year is that the investment in the industry is stable. But it's stable good enough? I don't think so. We are set with a big ambition. We hear from M300 that off-grid solar has to cover 41% of the connections. So we really do need a step change in the investments in the industry, as you also alluded in the introduction. So yeah, that's my sneak peek into the data, and we'll talk more about that.
Thank you, Laura. Next, I'd like to introduce Benson Ireri from the Clean Cooking Alliance. Benson is head of the Clean Cooking Delivery Unit in Kenya, a joint initiative of the Clean Cooking Alliance and the Office of the President through the Office of the Special Envoy on Climate Change. He leads efforts to accelerate the transition to clean cooking through policy, data, and investment facilitation. Benson works closely with government, DFIs, the private sector actors and private sector actors to structure bankable pipelines, including the recently developed institutional clean cooking sector PAC. He has over 10 years experience in energy access and blended finance across sub-Saharan Africa. Benson, over to you.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name is Benson Ireri. I lead the Clean Cooking Delivery Unit, nested in the Office of the Special Envoy for Climate Change in Kenya, which is a special initiative between the Office of the President and the Clean Cooking Alliance. And I think one of the key things that we have seen, so first and foremost is if you compare access to energy, overall, electricity, and with clean cooking, I think the comparison is very divergent. I think over the last 10, 15 years, we have made significant progress in as far as electricity access is concerned. But then looking at clean cooking, I think there's a significant gap. And part of it, of course, is how do we purpose clean cooking, or how do we look at clean cooking? I think traditionally clean cooking has been looked at in terms of philanthropic intervention. And the biggest challenge has been then unlocking private capital and also working, for example, with investors and companies. And so the delivery unit is so much focused in terms of how do we then help in terms of refocusing clean cooking into a green, viable investment opportunity to unlock the opportunity. I think, as you correctly mentioned, we recently developed an investor pack for institutional clean cooking, which again traditionally has been left out, the institutional clean cooking sector. That all the efforts in the clean cooking have focused on households, but clean cooking provides a concentrated demand for energy, hence providing an opportunity for investment. But then how do investors look at it? What are the data? How can we be able to convince that the investors that the sector is viable? And so we developed this sector, the sector pack, which quantifies $589 million for Kenya alone, is required. Now, looking at that from a regional perspective, all the four COMESA countries, I think demonstrates a huge opportunity for investment. And that's what we are looking at in terms of unlocking and collaborating with investors and companies in the clean cooking space. Thank you, Benson.
Next on the panel to introduce is Tinashe Makoni from TDB. Tinashe is Group Executive and Deputy General Counsel at the Trade and Development Bank, TDB Group. He oversees key aspects of the group's legal and governance functions and co-chairs the Credit Review Committee, supporting credit oversight, risk management, and strategic decision-making across the organization. Tinashe has over 18 years' experience advising and leading on complex transactions, governance, and risk management across financial and development finance sectors. Tinashe, over to you.
Thank you so much, Will. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'll tell you a little bit about TDB, and I'll touch very briefly on our partnership with Ascent. So for those of you that don't know, TDB Trade and Development Bank Group is a vehicle of COMESA. We were established in 1985 with the aim being really to be the arm that finances projects across the region and fosters integration. At the moment, our balance sheet sits at about $10 billion, and we're active, I think, in over 25 countries. I know it's our member states are changing. We're about to introduce some new ones, so I think 25 at least, I'll say that. And our partnership with Ascent. So we have a very fruitful and growing partnership with the World Bank Group, and Ascent is one of the vehicles. We've received capital in excess of $300 million, which is meant to, amongst other things, facilitate and assist development and financing in the DRE sector, amongst other things. Our role really is to work with the World Bank on originating, screening, due diligence, and ultimately deployment of capital on their behalf. It really is a true partnership, and this is one of the vehicles through which sort of Ascent and TDB will be working together to support the sector. Happy to dive more into that as we go along. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tinashe. Next is Kenneth Gitonga from Camco Clean Energy. Kenneth is Market Development Facility Manager at Camco, leading market development facilities, including the REP2 Technical Assistance Facility, which supports distributed renewable energy businesses across sub-Saharan Africa. He focuses on unlocking investment readiness and bankability through targeted grants, concessional capital, embedded advisory, and market-shaping interventions. Kenneth, over to you.
Thanks, Will. I'm Kenneth, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. A little bit about Camco. Camco is an investment manager that holds a couple of mandates around climate finance and inclusive finance as well. We are currently managing about maybe 6 to 7 funds. 2 of them really focused on climate investment, and alongside that, we have a technical assistance facility that goes towards really supporting companies in our pipeline or outside our pipeline become investment ready. So Camco is more of looks at the entire value chain. How can we prepare projects to come into our facilities? And I think that's the sweet spot. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Kenneth. Sam Ojijo, right next to me, is from ReNewGen, Kenya. He's the country director here in Kenya, and ReNewGen is a DRE company with offices also in Burundi, South Sudan, and Uganda. As ReNewGen Kenya director, Samwel has been at the forefront of training young people in leadership and starting SMEs in renewable energy across Kenya since 2018. He holds a bachelor in technology and telecommunication engineering from Technical University of Kenya. He's passionate about climate change, and he's a peacemaker and a great advocate for renewable energy. Over to you, Sam.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ojijo, and I'm the Director ReNewGen, Kenya. ReNewGen has companies in Uganda, South Sudan, and in Burundi, Tanzania, and also Uganda. So our mantra is that we are leading in training young people into joining renewable energy business and capacity building them into making sure that they can make livelihood out of renewable energy. So why ReNewGen is because we want to have 1,000 young people every year joining renewable energy business. So it can be in at the retail level or just reselling, and all these we are doing because of our mantra of stewardship. So based on the Bible and on the Quran. And if I don't say it would be so. Some of my colleagues are here and they will agree with me that in Genesis, I think somewhere earlier there, it says that the Lord God took man, and then put in the Garden of Eden to take care of it, to work it and to take care of it. So I believe that in renewable energy, that is stewardship that we want. And also in Quran, there's a place that says that we are not supposed to be wasteful when we eat and stuff like that. So this is in our faith-based organization and how we deal with it, and throughout my training with young people and making sure they join renewable energy, it is also a stewardship role to me as a person. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And finally, we have Jordi Woodley from EcoSafi. She's co-founder and CEO, and is building one of East Africa's leading clean cooking businesses. EcoSafi scales pellet fuel and Tier 5 gasification stoves across Kenya, Uganda, and now Zambia, combining fuel sales and carbon revenue into a single commercially viable model. The company focuses on customer adoption, operational rigor, and data-driven growth at scale. Operating at the intersection of climate, circular agriculture, and health, EcoSafi's carbon project holds an AA rating from B0, placing in the top 4% globally, while delivering one of the most customer-centric cooking solutions in the market. Jordi, over to you.
Thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan, but everyone calls me Jordi. And this is such a relevant panel. I was doing some research recently, and there's 530 million people in East and Southern Africa who don't have access to clean cooking. On this continent, we spend $40 billion a year on dirty fuels. It's a $40 billion market here. And this is to get companies ready to be investable from the private sector, right? To commercialize these opportunities. 40 billion is the size of the global coffee market, the global bottled water industry, and interestingly, video game consoles. That's a $40 billion market. And think about how many investable opportunities are there, but we haven't quite cracked this one. So from the introduction that Will gave, you can tell that I take a very commercial approach. If the customers like it, it's a daily use product, you should be able to succeed. You should be bankable, you should be financeable, but there are a lot of barriers in the way of that. And so I think the more choices customers have, the better, just like any other sector. And I really look forward to seeing how this initiative is going to create bankable solutions to solve this incredibly impactful issue, both on our trees and our climate and our health, but through commercial means. It's an extraordinary opportunity.
Thank you, Jordi. I'm going to do a round of questions for each panelist, and then we are going to open it up to the audience. We really do want to hear from those of you here for any questions, either for the panelists directly or from myself or Chris about the actual facility. So please take some time to think through questions that you might like to ask, and we'll go through this round. My first question is for Laura. And Laura, as you mentioned, in 2025, we'll expect to see another year of relatively stable investment figures for off-grid solar and increased levels of concentration in the segment. What do you think these trends indicate for earlier stage companies going forward?
Yeah, so it seems what we see, it is a maturing market. However, it is not maturing evenly. It is to some degree positive that that the market is maturing. There's a bit of consolidation. And we have proved that we have the technology and it is sort of like the right fit for energy access. However, indeed, early stage companies are not having it easy to raise money. Capital is getting more and more selective, and less companies are being funded. So there are some good news, I think, and we have seen many funds closing in the past and still closing that can have matching ticket sizes to fund these companies. So we've seen a few examples. Kawasaki, Hummingbird, GGF is deploying Nithio. I met a few people here in the conference that have the right type of capital. Acumen, Electrify, there are a few, Safiri as well. So the problem is that these investors are saying that there's no pipeline, and the companies say that they're not receiving the funding. So I think there is some homework to do for us, and the PPF facility is quite fitting, and just not to only talk about the problems we have, but I think that we have found a few things that can work for the industry. So I'll just bring two examples of that. I think there's been a lot of TA in the industry as well. And there's been TA around investment readiness. But then you go to the investors and say, but who are they investment ready for, right? So I think we need to be very, very intentional with this TA. It needs to align with what these investors they're willing to offer, the capital, and probably they have the right ticket size, but they're not getting the pipeline. So I think we need to be really, really intentional that TA is really translating into what the investors are looking for. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about. And the second one is really more coordination, more sort of like communication, convening between the grants, the debt, and the equity capital, because we see quite a lot of companies, especially on this seed, sort of very early stage, that do get stuck in the grant, but are not really graduating to receive that and equity. So I think if we're able to work together more on, bridging the gaps between the grants and the TA, for the grants to be perhaps looking more commercially as sort of what the next level of investment for those companies is, we could have a few wins coming down the line.
Thank you, Laura. Sam, you're based here in Kenya, but as you mentioned, ReNewGen also operates in South Sudan and Burundi. What can you tell us about the different approaches to attracting finance taken by ReNewGen, given the different state of the DRE markets in these countries?
Thank you. So I'll start in Kenya, for example. When we started ReNewGen Kenya, we started to do trainings for young people in Mumias. The reason we were doing this is because home systems and DRE products were going to the western part of the country, and then there were no people to maintain them, and some companies who just dump not very standard products in the western region of the country. And this created a lot of negative perception towards renewable energy and their home systems, some of them. When we went there and started training young people and women on how they can simply just wipe off the panel to make sure it charges the battery more effectively, just simple thing. Then they realize also it is really their fault that it is not working properly, probably. And this created a ripple effect on how much intake that some companies managed after those particular trainings. So the investment approach, what we needed as a company was to support the trainings. We get professional technicians and business guys to go and train these people on how to maintain and continue with enjoying renewable energy at that time. I'll come back to it later. But if I say, for example, South Sudan, at that time when we started, pay-as-you-go could not be possible, but it was possible here in Kenya because of the challenges in mobile money and how the customers would really manage to buy and get the products and pay later. So we had to find seed capital for buying the actual products, and then you have to resell. Even after you train the women and the youth, then you have to give them a bit of products that they can go and resell, and they come for more from ReNewGen. So those were approaches by then. And then when we advanced, we realized down the line that the youth and the people that we were training, in 1 year, then they would probably fade away and go into something else. So after the first intake, then the intakes would decline and decline. Not because, what we realized is that there was gap in terms of making sure that they can continue with the business. We did not see that by then. In Burundi, for example, then the e-mobility had not been there, but it was here in the country. So we approached DRE on different products like home systems and other approaches by finding seed to buy the actual products and reselling, but after training. So it was a mixture of training as a marketing and also training as capacity building for the different segment of the people that we were working with at that time.
Thank you, Sam. Jordi, I wanted to ask, in your experience, how have events in recent months impacted investor sentiment for clean cooking in Africa?
There's been a lot of movement in the markets in recent months, and it's a sector that moves very quickly because for most clean cooking companies, carbon is an essential revenue stream. And that can't be ignored, and that can have a positive reputation, a negative reputation. It tends to all be kind of lumped in together, and you get a single newspaper article criticizing or something, and everyone gets painted with the same brush. And that's challenging in a sector. But it's also hard. I can understand from the other side of the table how to figure out who is investable and who is not when everyone has a different story of what's going on out there. So I think this is a sector in which, especially with high quality carbon, and that's really what makes cooking companies investable if they have the high quality carbon. It's so important, the roles of governments in Africa that they play in setting up high standards, and choosing to offer authorizations to companies that have very auditable, very high standard carbon, because that's going to cut through a lot of the noise and the criticism of overcrediting this sector. And it gives a lot more confidence, to investors that projects aren't being approved willy-nilly, but the projects that really do deliver, that people actually use. I mean, they actually use that stove, and that means that tree is not being cut down. So how do they prove that? And for the government to put in the focus on distinguishing between all these projects, it can be difficult. It's like a fire hose of requests, I'm told. And I speak with multiple African governments myself on our own authorization. But that's the one key signal to investors, that there is quality out there. And I think a lot of investors now, with some recent events, are holding their breath, waiting to see which governments have an effective system that starts getting to what's called a letter of authorization. That's the final hurdle for anything in the compliance market of carbon, and actually even in the voluntary to some degree. So there haven't been a lot of LOAs, as they say, issued by governments, but it feels like that's coming very soon in a number of African governments, and I think that's actually going to be the number one thing we can do to unleash capital. I mean, in my personal experience, there's been a lot of slowdown until everyone's holding their breath to see kind of where the chips fall and when the approvals are coming out. Not who is getting the approvals, although that's important, but if anyone's getting the approvals. And I have full confidence those are coming down the pipeline. I have no doubt. I've had great conversations with multiple governments. It's just that the sooner they can go ahead and start issuing any approvals at all, the better it is for the whole sector, because then the investors say, there is something investable there, and it is worth our time and energy to do the due diligence on companies in the clean cooking sector, because if they're the right ones, eventually they'll get their LOA. But until we see some LOAs coming out, time is limited. We should maybe focus on other types of clean energy access projects, not cooking. So until we start seeing those LOAs, I think the cooking sector has been deprioritized for a lot of investors, and I'm really excited in the next few months. Hopefully it will pick up pace again.
Thank you, Jordi, and that's a good segue over to you, Benson. You're leading the clean cooking delivery here unit here in Kenya. What advice would you have for other national agencies to remove obstacles, accelerate investment in clean cooking, maybe achieve these LOAs that Jordi's referencing?
Thank you so much. I think even before I list down what I wanted to speak about, just an add-on to what Jordan has mentioned about. I think for carbon markets, what we are realizing is also the clarity in terms of what is required for the issuance. Whether, for example, you're speaking about of letter of approvals, of letter of authorization, or even the publication of the whitelist. I think the project developers probably are not very clear in terms of what governments are looking at. And so just starting my point in terms of building to what Jordan has mentioned, I think is providing that level of clarity in terms of project developers is what the government will be looking at. ETC, I think, will be very important. And the second thing, I think in the context of Kenya, and as far as carbon markets is concerned, especially for clean cooking, has been the question about the publication of whitelists. Every project developer that you speak to, they're asking about when is the whitelist is going to be published, and I think also meaning that is going to also provide some sense of clarity to the project developers for clean cooking. I think that was just an addition to what Jordan has mentioned. Getting to what other countries can be able to do, and I think building on the experiences that we've been getting from Kenya, based on the Clean Cooking Delivery Unit, I think every country now has a lot of ambitions in terms of transitioning to clean cooking. But I guess two things that needs to happen. One, as I started by mentioning, is for a long time, clean cooking has been looked as a philanthropic intervention, right? And I think it's presented itself as a viable and a sustainable green investment opportunity. And so helping to shift the conversation and the narrative to investors that this sector is actually bankable. That's number one. But then number two is how do we shift again from just ambition into actually a quality pipeline that can can be banked and that can be invested by the financials and investors. What that means from my side, even in terms of technical assistance, is going to be a lot of work in terms of project preparation. We just finalized with the development of the sector pack that I was talking about. A lot of investors now are reaching out to us, but then the bigger question is how do you shift then this market that we have managed to segregate into something that can be bankable? And bankability is not just about the numbers alone. The schools, for example, we have 100,000 schools that require to be transitioned to clean cooking, but also from a policy stroke regulatory perspective. If companies are going to be banking on carbon finance, what exactly does it mean in terms of then quantifying on that carbon finance for them to be able to say the way we are structuring our finance, we can be able to bank on the carbon markets through carbon finance. So I guess that also project preparation, and I look at it at the entire value chain, not just about from the companies themselves alone, but also working the journey with the companies to also the policy stroke regulatory providers who are supposed to help in terms of unlocking these. In a way, then it can be in a position to help provide confidence to investors. For me, I think is going to be important. Part of the project preparation, I think, is also the whole question about feasibility studies. When you're speaking about 1,000 schools, for example, just giving a very practical example of what you've been doing. When you're speaking about 1,000 schools that needs to be transitioned, or 1,000 hospitals or prisons that needs to be transitioned to clean cooking, the bigger question from an investor point of view is how much, for example, are they currently using in as far as firewood? In a way, then we can be in a position to say we are going to be tapping into this current budget on firewood, and how do we then allocate that funding, and how do we then reallocate that funding into alternative financing model and the business model development? So I guess the question about feasibility study, project preparation, all the way to then the question about bankability, linking with the first point that I had made. The third point is a question about de-risking. Unfortunately, clean cooking sector, I think has been perceived as a very risky sector. And then when you even combine now the question about carbon finance and the experiences from cocoa, for example, I mean, I'm not going to shy away from speaking about it because those are some of the things that we need to speak about. So the question is, how then do we also build the confidence of investors that this sector is not as risky as it's perceived to be? Now, it means so many things, from policy clarity, regulatory clarity, but I think also giving a very practical example from the government of Kenya is GOK, government of Kenya, is currently putting together a de-risking vehicle, a green investment facility, currently capitalized at $40 million and going to be expanding to around $200 million, where any green investment opportunity can be able to tap into. So I guess just also government demonstrating that you have your skin in the game by also establishing some of these de-risking vehicles or mechanisms, I think is also going to be playing a critical role in terms of building the confidence of the investors and also helping in terms of de-risking the sector. And then finally is a bigger question about data. I think we may not be able to actually amplify the role of data. I think Ambassador is the one who was speaking during the opening remarks, that what role data plays, both in terms of helping the investors to be able to see the opportunity, but also in terms of helping to inform policies. What policies, for example, are going to be required? Unfortunately, clean cooking sector compared to electricity is actually the one that doesn't have most of those data that can be in a position to help in terms of informing investments. So how we can be able to collect the right kind of data that can be able to inform the sector, both from an investment, pipeline development, policy intervention perspective, I think is going to be very important. And finally, integrated plans and strategies. I think for a long time we have seen a lot of progress, especially in as far as electricity access is concerned. Whether you're speaking about from last mile connections, mini grids, etc. But the bigger question is when you start planning for electricity access without clean cooking as part of also electricity access, for example, how do we integrate these plans in a way then clean cooking is not an afterthought, but actually from the way we are thinking about it, from the way we are planning, from the interventions that we are putting in place, is going to be helping or to play a significant role in terms of then helping to make sure that we prioritize and we put at the front and center clean cooking in the energy transition agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know there's probably a lot of discussion that could be had, but I think we're going to continue moving on and see what questions might come in from the audience. Thank you very much, Benson. Kenneth, we have had a lot of discussion so far on off-grid solar and on clean cooking. I did want to pivot to mini-grids with you knowing REP's background with mini-grids and continued interest through the REP 2 fund. Could you provide insights from CAMCO on the importance of standardized regulations and RBF programs in reviewing prospective investments in the mini-grid segment?
Yeah, sure. So from CAMCO, REP, and REP 2 perspective, so just for context, REP was one of our first funds where it was grant funded by FCDO to the tune of 120 million. And we were able to experiment a lot with different instruments around the DRE sector. And from that came REP 2, which is a private debt vehicle that has a TA facility alongside it to that really focuses on investment readiness and bankability. From a mini-grid perspective, I think standardized regulations and RBF programs, they really enable, first of all, scale, but also investable pipeline. And from an investor perspective, what we really look at, if I was to lay it, is first, the regulations, so clear regulations and predictable rules. That's the one thing we would really look at. And this is things like tariffs, licensing, grid arrival, compensation, anything that reduces regulatory risk. That's the first layer. Then we look at the commercial viability of the business model. And this has to make sense. The unit economics have to make sense. And from that, we're able now to look at the developer themselves, the capacity of the developer to actually execute what they say they will execute. And lastly, we look at scalability. And in the mini-grid sector, this means instead of looking at one project, how do you look at a portfolio of projects, and how do you scale that? How do you view the developers' ability to scale and execute on such a large scale? So that's one way I would look at it, because I always feel there's a big sort of wall between investors and developers, and we're trying really to bridge that through our TA facility. And partnerships with, for example, like the COMESA PPF will enable us to just do more around, the TA facility, because we have a clear view of what the IC wants and what, will make a good project that will give us returns, especially on the debt side of things. And just on the RBFs, I think the biggest thing is they just have to be well structured and have predictable revenue on our end. That's what really matters at the end of the day, and how quickly the payout is made. So that's.
Thank you, Kenneth. That seems to be a consistent feedback on the RBF program, so that's very helpful. Final question from me is for Tinashe. And it's just one that you mentioned earlier on some of the types of projects you've worked on before, but TDB does have a traditional background with larger investment projects, infrastructure projects. How is TDB planning to adapt to the challenges of investing in earlier stage DRE and clean cooking companies through the Ascent program?
Thanks, Will. So I've been on the other side of this world. So I've only been at TDB for 2 years, but before that, pretty much all my career had been in more private sector focused, and I've had the joy and the pain of trying to raise money from DFIs. And you know that as DFIs are not always the most nimble, the most innovative, or the most flexible in how we do these things. And TDB is working at it. It's a journey. We're not there yet. We'll get there. But there's a couple of things I think that we're in the process of implementing. The first element was, I think, a recognition that the type of capital we have at TDB particularly, which is commercial, it's returnable, and fairly expensive. We raise a lot of our capital from governments as well as from debt capital markets. So for DRE, the sector, this sort of capital is not ideal. It doesn't give you the full suite of solutions that I needed. So the partnership with World Bank and Ascent has been absolutely incredible. It's given us different tools. It's given us RBFs. It's been able to do grant funding, concessional. We've been able to do equity. We've been even able to do junior equity, right? Really kind of first loss. We've been able to do guarantees. So there's a whole suite of solutions, again, including this facility here with COMESA. So that's one element. We're not there yet. To have more capital and more cheaper money. So if our colleagues at the center are listening, please give us more money and give us cheaper money. Everybody will be much happier. So that's one. The other element was our internal calibration, right? So we are geared, as you say, we'll sort of larger projects, often project finance, expensive to structure, non-recourse, single source income, lots of documentation, lawyers make lots and lots of money from it, but it's just really not fit for purpose, right? That approach to funding. The other element was, typical corporate financing, cash flow positive, fairly sort of stable, big companies again. So we needed to find sort of a middle ground where you combine elements of project financing with traditional corporate financing for the sector. So again, still a work in progress, but at least we're kind of recognizing that. And one outcome has been TDF, our Trade and Development Fund, which is meant to be going forward, once it's kind of fully, it's up and running and doing well, but once it's much bigger and much more established, will be our concessional arm. So it's not on our main balance sheet, so it'll have a different risk tolerance. It will be able to, take longer term positions and be less worried about capital preservation than our main balance sheet. So TDF is and my colleague Andrew, I think, will speak about TDF, but that's the vehicle that we really see sort of impacting the sector. And importantly, it's geared at smaller transactions, $10 million and below. The credit committee meets weekly. So I co-chair that committee. We meet weekly. We can take decisions on a round-robin basis, so you're not sitting there waiting for a whole month. And the mandate really is to be more entrepreneurial, more risk-tolerant, and quicker and more flexible. We've cut down our approval process from being 3 steps to being a 2-step process and so on. Again, we're not the finished article, but I think there's a recognition that we need to do things differently. And I think in the final element is our mindset, is to recognize that this needs flexibility. You need new instruments. Even the whole world, Jordan, of carbon financing, the compliance markets and the, voluntary markets, what that all means. It's all really complex. And Ben, you laugh, but it's we've had our first foray into the sector, and it's so different to what we traditionally are doing in our spaces. So again, learning from other people, being open to change, willing to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And I guess in the final thing, as a lawyer, which I'm quite proud of, is we're trialing, one of the things that lawyers do is, and I'm sorry, I hope there's not too many lawyers here, but, we love complexity. We like hundreds of, pages of documentation. So one of the mandates I've given for my team is to say, look, let's simplify that, right? So we're trialing transaction in the sector where we've turned a 100-page facility agreement into a 14-page document with much simpler terms, much easier, to read. Our borrowers won't need external counsel, certainly not expensive counsel sitting in Paris or London or New York and so on. So again, that's an area where I think we are changing our mindset and trying to be better able to serve our communities and serve the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Tinashe, and thank you all for the responses. I think at this stage, we would love to hear from the audience. We'll take questions. If you could introduce yourself and the company, and then please ask a question directly to one of the panelists or to myself or Chris on the PPF. Panel has done a great job responding to questions so far. Okay, we've got one. Great.
Thank you all for the insightful presentations. My name is Rebecca Munir. I'm from the State Department of Energy. I am the project coordinator for the Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project. And so we are excited that Ascent is also coming to Kenya. So, and one of the questions that I have is to Chris. In terms of the scope, I know you mentioned all the number of countries where the project preparation facility will be operating. But what is the nexus with the national assent projects? So is it possible for companies, for example, in Kenya, though that we have our own assent, to apply to the regional COMESA facility? And then another one, not sure who will address it, but I just want to know, in terms of, actually to Ken, to Gitonga, in terms of financing, and we have, our experience under COSAP is that we have the large multinational companies that do very well, but now if we want to expand and make access to energy, even to clean cooking, accessible, we really must also work with local entrepreneurs, local companies. How are we doing that? And to just make sure that we don't have international companies just coming in, then for the duration of the project, then they leave, and sustainability becomes a problem. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Rebecca. So I think when it comes to what you're asking, basically the nexus between ourselves and the national programs under Ascent. As it is right now, I don't think we have any restrictions for any companies to come to us directly through the different modes we spoke about, either the call for proposals or any of the other means which we had described. The thing which I would always, sort of ask is this something which, if it's a specific project, is this something that has been, looked into before, and for one reason or another did not go through, and just to make it efficient for everyone, just it'd be great to have, full disclosure. So whatever comes to us, there is, the background that is there, and we know what to work with. So generally, right now, I don't think there's any restriction. But it's always good to just coordinate and make sure we are, talking to each other. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the question. So I believe your question was around, how you build local capability. And it's funny you asked, but, CAMCO it's been at the center of the funds that we develop and the mandates that we actually deploy, because we have one of the first funds, REP, was actually focused on middle stage local developers, how we can actually fund them through various instruments, debt-like, equity-like structures, so that they're able to actually move up the value chain, become strong companies, and either collaborate or take over markets where, other international players play. In addition to that, we also have our SPAC fund. Our SPAC fund focuses on CNI and energy efficiency companies as well, locally established, that are doing projects, around active energy in the various industries in Kenya, in East Africa, and West Africa as well. So those are two funds already that are really focused on how you finance local developers. And through REP2, one of our major funds, we have a REP2 facility, as I mentioned, and there we really look at building the capacity of local developers to actually achieve bankability. So that focus. Thanks. Yeah. So as I was saying, the REP2 technical assistance facility enables developers, local developers, to actually build the capacity to access our debt facility. So there's a very intentional and targeted approach around building local developers in the sub-Saharan market. I hope I've answered the question sufficiently.
Thank you, Kadah. Thank you, Kadah. Any other questions from the audience?
Hi everyone, my name is Samwel Ismail. I work for CLASP. My question is about the facility. I think it was his name, the gentleman from Gypsum Capital. Sorry if I pronounced that. Cygnum Capital. You mentioned that you have $25 million for the 3 pillars. So how many projects do you intend to take on for the 5 years? And do you intend to work in coordination with market institutions, considering you are targeting private sector? Then I also want to understand, is there any specific gap you want to address in project preparation, just to make sure you don't duplicate what other people are doing? Yeah.
Thank you. Firstly, the approach we're taking is demand-driven, which basically means we are fairly open to what the market brings to us. So it gives us flexibility. We've not necessarily decided we're going to allocate a certain port to whichever. But the main thing that guides us is really working towards bankability. And in every intervention we are thinking of, either if it's a market system intervention or dealing directly with a company, that is something that really guides the way we approach things. So as it is right now, it's really early to decide the sort of number of companies we are going to work with. But to give you a sense, and to also touch on your second question where you talk about working with industry associations, for us that is really important, because we know we only have this many resources in terms of team that we can use to deploy. And to really enhance our reach, it's very clear we have to work together with market industry associations for that matter. Yeah? So the way we're thinking of is potential developing partnerships and using that as a means to reach to a broader set of potential beneficiaries. And if you think about it, some of the earlier stage companies in this DRE clean cooking ecosystem need really capacity building, training. They need to develop those skills internally so that they can reach, can start their journey towards bankability. So we view that as a very key option when it comes to deployment, and especially ensuring we cover as much of the market as we can. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And I should say we did actually engage with CLASP and a number of other TA providers during our market assessment. And we are intent with the TA that we're going to deliver through the PPF. We are assessing what some of the other providers are already doing. We're trying to focus on areas where we can be additional. And I think to your point, we are looking at how we can better coordinate and collaborate with other providers of these types of services in the market. I'm going to maybe ask for one more question, and then we'll close out. Yeah.
Hello, Samwel from the African Forum for Utility Regulators. One is a comment, the other is a question. So I'll start with a comment. I think it was Kenneth. You mentioned standardization. It's impossible to standardize regulations across Africa. The word you should have used is harmonization. Regulators are more open to harmonization than standardization. This question can go to any of you, but most likely to Ben, because you're the one who brought up the issue of data and how it can impact policy. So how do you propose policymakers, because we represent policymakers, some of us, how do you propose we get this data, most especially for clean cooking, to make sure that the environment is actually sustainable, enabling for clean cooking initiatives?
Thanks a lot for that question. And I'll give a very practical example of what we are doing. So when we realized the role of data and the gap in the data conversation, we held a couple of consultations, both with the data providers, what you'd call, so folks from the Ministry of Energy, Kenya National Bureau of Standards, the data centers, etc., and then the companies on the other hand, and the rest of the other data users, so to speak, right? And where we wanted to start was first and foremost data for what data is currently available in what form, and in what form and format is required by especially the end users. And I think also just to clarify, even for end users in this case, we came to realize you might be thinking that the end users are actually the companies alone, but also data is required by the policymakers to influence policies. So also the way you present data in a way it can be able to make sense. And so we went through a rigorous process. And I think two ways that we have come to a conclusion, which is now the next phase of the work that we are going to be doing, is I think geospatial. Somebody spoke about the geospatial nature of data that can be able to especially help also project developers to be in a position to see when we're speaking about institutions that require what technology, what fuel for clean cooking, where exactly are they? So providing data that is open source, open access is something that we actually arrived at, and that's something that we are building onto in very close collaboration also with the project developers, companies, etc. But I think also more important is being very clear in terms of data that can be able to inform the final investment and the policy making. And so we haven't finalized in terms of coming up with that, the format of that open access platform that we are going to be working with. Sorry, we are going to be supporting in terms of developing and supporting in terms of, the architecture of that platform. I think finally, just for me to speak, is one major thing that we have learned is the need for consultation so that you come up with something that actually responds to what the market requires. That may take some bit of time, that may take some bit of resources, but that consultation for us is quite critical so that the end product that you're actually going to be designing, whether open access, open source, etc., then actually helps to respond in terms of what the market is in need of.
Thank you. And that's going to wrap up this panel discussion. I wanted to say before we close and give a round of applause to our panelists, things to look forward to from the PPF. First of all, we are going to have a website that's going to be on the webpage. It's going to be on the COMESA website. So keep looking for that. That's going to give you information about calls for proposals, expressions of interest for the roster of experts that we'll use for delivering TA, and other announcements related to the PPF. So that's coming soon. We do have the assentppf@cygnumcapital.com email address that we are happy to take any questions on the PPF as we work towards the first calls for proposal and really engaging with the market. And then we're also, I won't say any names, but we are aiming to wrap up some of our key partnerships in the very near future, and hopefully we'll have some announcements around that as well with some of our investor and association partners in the coming weeks or months. So hopefully you get much more news about the actual operations of the PPF very soon. With that, I would like to again give a round of applause for COMESA and the ambassador for the opening remarks, my colleague Chris, and all the panelists. Thank you so much for listening.